It is my honor now to introduce the highly accomplished dignitary on the dais, Ms. Alice Vaidyan, Chairman cum Managing Director, General Insurance Corporation of India, and the Chairperson of the Governing Board of National Insurance Academy. Madam is the first lady officer to assume the post of CMD at General Insurance Corporation of India. Madam is also the first ever lady CMD of public sector non-life insurance industry in India. With a career spanning over 30 years in the insurance and reinsurance industry, Mrs. Vaidyan has been recipient of many national and international awards. Business Today recognized Madam as one of the 30 most powerful women in Indian business in 2016 as well as in 2017. Fortune India announced Ms. Alice Vaidyan as the 7th most powerful women in business in November 2017 issue of the most powerful women in business. A postgraduate in English literature and having been trained at the world-famous Harvard Business School, Mrs. Vaidyan is also on the boards of prestigious organizations like LIC of India, ECGC Limited, Ken India Assurance Company Limited, Indian Registrar of Shipping, GIC Housing Finance Limited, to name a few. With this quick introduction, may I request Madam to kindly address us all. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ma'am.
Good morning and a very warm welcome to you all. I have a bad throat, so you have to excuse me if I pause. Respected Honorable Chairman of IRDA, Dr. Subhash Chandra Guntia, NIA Director, Mr. Srinivasan, Mr. Satish Raju, friends from the industry, both from the insurance companies and the broking side, and ladies and gentlemen. I think looking at the crowd in the room, I am in fact very impressed. I don't think we've ever had such a big crowd here. I can see friends from not only from India, from outside of India in this room. And I'm sure I must compliment the National Insurance Academy for inviting friends not only from the Indian market, but from outside of India. And given that this is a very interesting topic, that was a very beautiful video clip which we saw at the beginning, which sort of summed up the essence. And I think the topic is very relevant, and the theme for the event, the challenges of climate risks on the insurance business, given both industry development in the last couple of decades as well as in the recent past. The reinsurance and the insurance sector has in fact witnessed many major catastrophes of varying proportion over the decades and has weathered them with remarkable fortitude and resilience. In fact, the last couple of decades have presented the insurance and the reinsurance industry with record cat losses. It is quite remarkable that the last 2 decades have thrown up 4 years with record losses. We are talking of 2005, 11, 2017, and now 2018 as well. So 2 of this, incidentally, were consecutive years of 2017 and 18. One would, going by statistical fallacy, expect that one cat year will not be immediately followed by another cat year, but we have seen that that was not to be. The UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, report, I think somebody has talked about it earlier, has released in October 2018, titled Global Warming of 1.5 degree centigrade, presents an alarming picture. Now, compared to the temperature in the pre-industrial era, we are already warmer by 1 degree and we are headed for a 3 degree increase. So going by some estimates, even the global sea levels have risen nearly 8 inches since 1880. So the change in ecology and life will be dramatic between 1.5 and 2 degrees itself. So the change is accelerating, and unless identified measures and plans are implemented, we have an enormous challenge on our hand. Perhaps the most important thing that cannot be overemphasized is that any marginal temperature increase will have detrimental effects in geometric progressions and not arithmetic progressions. So it is just like the human body temperature. As you reach the outer bound of the acceptable temperature range, the situation becomes far more alarming. So it is reported that once this outer bound of 1.5 degrees is touched, another 0.5 degrees will have far more pronounced effects on drought, floods, extreme heat, and poverty across the globe. There is also another angle to this issue which we are facing in this regard, which is that a significant proportion of the global population needs to be lifted above the poverty levels. And this would require exhaustive usage of resources, including energy resources. Possibly the catch is that almost all growth is contingent on energy usage, and this cannot be avoided in the near long term. The report, in fact, says that urgent and unprecedented changes are needed to reach the target. It is indeed a clarion call to all the stakeholders and policy makers. And as was mentioned in the clip in the morning, this is the time to act. In fact, we have heard so much of advices. It is the time to act. Yet another factor which is in fact aggravating the matters is the widening gulf which is between the scientific and the policy imperatives on one side and the change in political discourse with marginalized groups becoming more assertive, vocal, and we have seen on climate change sometimes even aggressive. In fact, the devastating hurricanes, we are talking of US in the 2 successive years, record droughts in Cape Town, the forest fires in the Arctic from Sweden to Alaska, wildfires in California, again in 2 successive years, all point to evident climate change. We also recently heard about the bitter cold in much of the central and eastern US, arising from polar vortex. By some accounts, climate change is resulting in disruption of polar vortices, and this can cause more such episodes of extreme cold weather. So I believe that the voice of the skeptics has now to become more muffled going forward. At 2 degrees, the global population facing water stress could double as compared to that at 1.5 degrees. So there is now also the fear of climate-related or climate-induced poverty, while the journey of rising above poverty is far from over. So the warming could also cause climate-induced migration, and also, as we have seen, refugee issues as well. So with each passing year, we witness weather changes. You see hot days in the northern hemisphere becoming more common and severe, causing deaths and more forest fires. And we also hear of anecdotal reports in Europe and other northern hemisphere regions of heat waves and where these are actually aberrations. There will be, in fact, catastrophic effects on elements in the ecosystem, such as insects and corals as well. And as I mentioned, it will worsen in geometric progression with each fraction of rise in temperature. As we see the greater melting of ice, sea level rise, and higher oceanic acidity, and reducing oxygen levels, alongside flooding in coastal cities, all point to a very challenging scenario. And the effects of global warming will not be uniform across the globe, and thus the volatility in its effects can cause further oscillations, which will adversely affect all aspects of human living and ecology. So deforestation for agriculture is further aggravating the situation through conversion of a natural carbon sink. The IPCC chart, in fact, charts out pathways to achieve a 1.5 degrees, essentially relying on changes in land use and technological change such as electric transport systems and carbon capture technology. Carbon pollution would have to be cut by 45% by 2030. Carbon prices that would need to rise significantly to be able to achieve the objectives that are compelling. So on the positive side, significant progress has been made in the domain of renewable energy, and governments and research are increasingly alive to the developments in this space. In fact, we are talking of the Kerala floods, Satish didn't mention. I think the focus of insurers and reinsurers need to shift to where cat events happen. We were called by the Kerala government, both Satish and I, both of us did go and meet the government. They wanted to know, as from the insurance sector or the reinsurance sector, what is it that we can contribute? What is it that we can advise governments? Because as we saw in Kerala floods, there was a 90% gap. Only 10% was covered, and that was a very glaring gap. So in fact, we did give a paper to the government as well, which has gone into their documents. It is being put up before the government. I think everywhere this is the case where we need to advise governments on the effects of climate change and the role insurance can play. In fact, the value of insurance, as Satish himself has put it, has to be highlighted by none other than us, the industry itself. Now coming to our sector, we're talking of insurance and reinsurance sector, I think we are alive to the challenges for at least a couple of decades. We have been talking of climate changes in almost all major insurance forums. What we saw in 2017 was in some ways quite remarkable with 3 severe hurricanes. We saw Harvey, Irma, and Maria. We have also seen 3 hurricanes earlier in 2005, Katrina, Rita, and Wilma. So if one looks at loss activity over 2 decades or so, the trends are very familiar and consistent with some variation, and that variation cannot be ignored. As far as industry capability to withstand catastrophes is concerned, so far they have been faced with immense resilience. With about 20% of the capital coming to the industry by way of alternative capital, I think the industry is more sure-footed today than ever before. With continued appeal to investors through the diversification benefit in their basket of investment options, the capital is expected to stay put in the medium to long term. And looking at the way alternative capital also has entered the industry, it is now at about 17%, which has developed just about over the last 2 decades. And the convergence is gradual, and it has majorly entered cat exposures, which could be modeled quite well. Now, talking of modeled catastrophe exposures, we know that we are along a fairly challenging learning curve. While cat models have to face inherent challenges when grappling with a single peril, the challenge is compounded when the hurricanes go with inundation events as well. This is what happened in Harvey. So we are faced with the challenge of modeling hurricanes, rainfall, and flooding all together. And while property damage also continues to present challenges, business interruption would in fact compound the challenge unless we develop sound basis for assessing it independently of the property damage in a major way. So if you're looking at trends of the insurance industry, we see per se there is no material change or surprise, so to say. We are seeing strong capitalization among the risk carriers. We are seeing continued commitment of the alternative capital to the sector. We see calibrated growth in the alternate capital. We see some shrinkage in traditional reinsurance capital, which has occurred for the last few years in a row. Lower than expected increase in the rating levels following the catastrophe events. We are seeing more segmented pricing changes, significant share of USA cats in the global cat losses, decreasing levels of reserve releases from earlier years. We are also seeing growing consolidation and low investment yields that are believed to have actually bottomed out. Most importantly, what we see is supply is outstripping demand and dipping returns on equity. In parallel, you see that the emerging trends are growth driven by Asia, and also share of cat losses from Asia we are seeing on the rise. The muted price increases we have seen after the record losses of 2017, the development of 2017 losses and the losses of 2018 which were higher than long-term average. All have actually challenged insurance players, both direct insurers and reinsurers, as well as both alternative capital and the traditional reinsurance players. Insurance catastrophe losses over the past 2 years itself add up to approximately US $230 billion. And the fourth costliest year, following the costliest year in history, does indeed present a stress for the industry, which the industry apparently is taking very well in its stride. And if one were to go by the rating agency's assessment, they have changed the outlook of the reinsurance sector from negative to stable. This is quite possibly based on assessment that the volatility for the industry will be lower and returns are settling lower at a new normal. So with industry with being able to absorb alternative capital as well. So as the sustainability is being integrated in the global policy framework, the Sustainable Development Goals 2030, there is an urgent need for insurance players and for governments to put their risk management on a sound footing. They need to rely on a good mix of risk financing and risk transfer to face the impending challenge, and I think Satish has thrown enough light on that in his talk. From the angle of preparedness, we need to assess if we are ready for losses from non-peak territories. How well can we handle model maturity issues for mega cat events? And what if the significant losses are non-modeled? How would industry deal with mega event with losses of about US $200 billion? Do we need to build a bigger margin of safety in our risk assessment? While leaving this thought with you, I wish you all the very best for a successful 2-day event and very fruitful interactions. Thank you.